Hi, this is part 2 of a video series about chord scales. The first part discussed diatonic chord scales and secondary dominants, and specifically focused on what are the default chord scale choices, in other words, the most common, as opposed to the less common optional chord scale choices for those types of chords. We're going to continue that discussion, but we're going to apply it to modal interchange. Now the first thing and modal interchange of course is the process of borrowing chords from a parallel key. Just in the way that there are default chord scales and there are optional chord scales, sometimes the default chord scale changes depending on the context that the chord is in. Now here we are in two forms of A. We're in A major here, and we're in A minor here. A major has 3 sharps, A minor has no sharps or flats. Well, we can use G7 in either of these situations in the key of A, but our surrounding environment is different. So our chord scale choice will often be different. Our default chord scale will be different. Okay, so let's see an example of that. It turns out, I'm going to start with A minor. It turns out in A minor, G7 or flat 7/7 is actually diatonic to natural minor. If we quickly look at this chart, we see that here are 4 common minor scales: A natural minor, A Dorian, A harmonic minor, and A jazz minor. And you can see that flat 7/7 is actually diatonic. There's no accidentals are required to make this chord in A minor. So if we're using this chord in A minor, we're actually not borrowing it. It's not a borrowed chord. It's just a diatonic chord. That means we have no sharps or flats, so we just have the notes of A natural minor. Oops, let me make this natural. Sorry, I didn't have that. There we go. And we're going to use it. We're going to use it in a minor key. So with a key signature of no sharps or flats. So in order to get my chord scale, these are the notes. This is where it's coming from. It's coming from A natural minor. But I need to create a chord scale, which means I need to start on G, because chord scales always start on the root of the chord. They're all about the chord, right? So the source scale is A minor, A natural minor, but the chord scale is going to be some kind of G scale. So I'm going to move these notes until they start on G. There they are. Now this is my chord scale. Again, this was my source scale. It's diatonic to A natural minor. This is my chord scale. Now a chord scale isn't really a chord scale until it's labeled, so I'm now going to label these notes, and here we go. 1, this is an available tension, T9, right, whole step below chord tone. This is my 3rd. Here's my S4, that note that the dominant chord were to proceed down a 5th. This would be the root of the target chord, which we don't, isn't usually a good idea to blend in with the dominant chord in mixture with the 3rd, so if we want to use that note, we have to make it a sus4 chord. But this is not a sus4 chord, so this becomes a harmonic avoid note. That's our 5th. Here's our T13, and there's a flat 7, and there's a 1. So I have not changed any of the notes. I have just changed the way the notes are being labeled in relation to the chord of the moment. And if you look closely, you will see that this chord scale is a Mixolydian chord scale. So that is the chord scale that we would use in a minor key context. We use flat 7/7 in a minor key context. We're going to end up with a mixo chord scale. And it makes sense, right? Because if we're in the minor key, we want that C natural. That C natural is the minor 3rd of A minor. We don't want to get rid of that. That's the crucial note that tells us we're in a minor key. All right, let's see what happens if we're in a major key context. Okay, now remember, I'll start with all diatonic sounds. Okay, we are in A major, and we want to figure out what's going to be the best chord scale for flat 7/7 when we are in A major, not A minor. So first of all, we need to start on G, and we need to have our chord tones, right? So let me do that. Let me move. Right now I have an A major scale, right? That's what I'm starting with. That's not going to be what I end up with, but it's going to be an A major scale. because that's our context. I'm going to move it to start on G, and then I'm going to make sure that I have my chord tones. Well, the first thing right off the bat is that I can't have a G sharp as my root. I need G natural, so I have to change that note. I need a B natural for my third. I need a D natural for my fifth. I've got that. And I need an F natural for my flat 7, so I do have to change this. So what I've done is I'm sort of going about this the other way. I'm saying I'm in A major. I know this chord is not diatonic, so I need to adapt it. I know that I'm basically in A major, but I'm going to have to adapt some of the notes in order to make sure I have all the correct chord tones. But the remaining notes that are not chord tones, I could consider keeping them diatonic to see what happens. What kind of chord scale do I get? Well, let's see. Let's start labeling it. I've got my 1. I've got a T9 again, just the way I did down here, because both of those notes are the same. I've got my third, just the way I did down below. But now here we come up with a difference. This note is a C sharp, and this note is a C natural. Well, C sharp is actually a good note to have in the key of A major, right? Because it's the third. So let's keep that, and that gives me T sharp 11. That gives me a tension. Here in minor, this is a harmonic avoid note, but up here the C sharp is a whole step above, and it works fine with the chord, and so it's an available tension. So I've gained a tension here, and it's a tension which helps support the key that I'm in. This is my 5th, this is my 13th, and there's my flat 7, and of course my root. Let's figure out what this chord scale is. 1, T9, 3, sharp 11, 5, 13, flat 7. Well, hopefully you know that this is the chord scale called Lydian flat 7. All right, so that means that in a major key, it makes more sense when we're using this chord to use a Lydian flat 7 chord scale. Because again, the choice of that scale is giving us notes which support our key environment. Now, but when I'm in a minor key, it makes more sense to use mix-up because those notes are supporting our key environment of A natural minor. Okay, so this is a proof that default chord scales for a given chord can be different depending on what type of key, right? Major or minor key. It's beyond the scope of the video to go over every possibility of every modal interchange chord, but this is more to alert you to the fact that you can't generalize about default chord scales for modal interchange chords. You have to learn them about their context. You have to sort of think about what context they're in. Is it a modal interchange chord being used in a major key, or is it a chord that's being used in a minor key context? Now the final question is, what is the source of this scale? Now we arrived at it not by finding a source and bringing the source notes in. We actually arrived at this scale by starting with the current key and then altering it to include chord tones, right? Here we started with A minor and we just moved it to start on G, and that's how we got the chord scale. But in this case we did it the other way around. So let's think backwards now. Which A scale that has G7 diatonically would have all these notes in it? It turns out it's kind of an unusual scale. If we reorder these notes starting on A, I'm just going to copy and paste them. But I'm going to start on A, so I'm going to get rid of that note. This is how we get our source scale, right? We take all the notes of the chord scale, this is the other way to do it, and go and start it on the source scale root. That in there. So now I've taken the notes of G, Lydian flat 7, but I've started it on A. That's what I've done. And let's see what we've got from there. So now we're thinking in A now. This is 1. This would be a 2 or a ninth. We'll just do scale labeling for now, not chord scale labeling. This would be a major third. So it's an A major scale so far. This would be a 4. This would be a 5, and this is a flat 6, and this is a flat 7. So we have an A scale that has a major third, but it has a flat 6 and a flat 7. Now the name for this scale is often I think there's more than one name for it, but the one that I know most commonly is Aeolian Major. Okay, so it's like an Aeolian scale, but with a major third. Now, that might seem like a really unusual scale to you, but don't forget, there's many, many scales because every scale can have modes of that scale. And it turns out this scale, Aeolian Major, is actually a mode of D melodic minor. In other words, these are the same notes as D melodic minor. So just the way major scales can have all their modes, well, the melodic minor scale can have all its modes, harmonic minor, etc. So there's a lot of things to learn once you get into all the modes of every scale. But in order to get the chord scale for flat 7/7 in a major key context, we didn't have to know this fairly obscure mode of melodic minor to do that. We could take the approach that I originally took, which is move the chord tones into a major key context, use surrounding major key notes, and you get a very workable chord scale in that context. It turns out the source for it is a little bit obscure, but that's okay. We can find it by reordering the notes in this way. Okay, hopefully that's clear enough for you, and I will continue to make other videos in this series that deal with other types of chords as well.